For today, we're going to be going over our quiz 3 review on slope slash rate of change. Remember, they mean the same thing. So as you're watching this Edpuzzle, you can watch as I go over a problem and then pause it and then go and copy it onto your review. Or if you know how to do a split screen, that would be best so that you can work while you're watching the Edpuzzle. So whatever you prefer. But let's go ahead and get started. The first question that we have, the first two, we're asked to find the slope of the graphs given. And so starting off with the first graph, I need to find the slope of this graph, and I know that in order to find the slope of a graph, I need to use our rise over run. And so in order to use a rise over run, I'm going to need 2 points. This graph does not give me the 2 points, so I'm going to choose 2 points. In this case, I'm going to choose this point here, and I'm also going to choose this point here. And so remember, you can choose any point that crosses these little squares right at the corner. So you could have even chosen this one. Those would have been other options, okay? Now, something to notice here on this graph is that we are used to our graph going by ones on the x-axis and then by ones on the y-axis as well. But if we look at this graph, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces, and the fifth space is 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces. This 10th space is 20. So that tells me that these are actually going by 2s instead of 1s. So every time I move a square, I'm actually moving 2 units. Same thing over here on the y-axis. We are moving 2 units. So make sure that you are always paying attention to that. Okay, so now I need to find my rise over run. And so I'm going to start at the point furthest to the left, which is this one here. And so we're going to go up 1, 2, 3. But remember, each of these counts as 2 because we're going by 2s on the y-axis. And so that means that I went up 2, 4, 6. So my rise is a positive 6. For my run, doing the same thing, but remember now run is from left to right. So where I left off, I'm going to go 2, 4. I moved over 4 spaces for my run. And so don't forget, the reason why it's 4 and not 2 is because each of these spaces is actually 2. We're not going by ones here, okay? From there, I'm going to go ahead and simplify. 4 does not go into 6 evenly, but they are both even, so I know I can divide both of them by 2. And so my final answer is that my slope is 3 over 2. Okay. Moving on to number 2. On number 2, again, I am not given 2 points, so I'm going to go ahead and select one. This point hits right on the corner, and this one doesn't, but this one does. Let's just check our units just to make sure we are going by ones. You always want to check that. So this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4. Perfect. So it is going by ones. Same thing on the y-axis. This is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, cool. So once we've figured that out, once we have checked that, remember you're going to use rise over run to find out what your slope is. So starting with our rise, I like to start with the point furthest to the left. You can start wherever you want, but don't forget that if we go up, that means that we will have a positive rise. If we go down, that means we will have a negative rise. Okay, so in this case, we are going to go down. 1, 2. Since I went down, that means that I get a negative 2 for my rise. For my run, remember for our run, if we move to the left, that means we'll have a negative. If we move to the right, that means we'll have a positive. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to move to my right. 1, 2, 3. So my run is a positive 3. In this case, 3 doesn't divide 2, and I also can't simplify that, so that would be my final answer, negative 2 over 3. Moving on to some tables. In order to find the slope of a table or the rate of change, I need to find the change in y. I'm just going to write it this time. Change in y and divide that Okay, in order to find the slope of a table, I need to find the change in y and divide that by the change in x. All right, so change in y first. For y, I'm asking myself, how do I get from a -8 to a -5? From a -5 to a -2, from a -2 to a 1, and from a 1 to a 4. So I know some of us get confused here where we have negatives. If that confuses you, look at the positive first. How do we get from 1 to 4 or the other way around? To get from 1 to 4, that means I'm adding 3. So let's check if it's the same all the way around. -8 plus 3 is -5. -5 plus 3 is -2. And -2 plus 3 is +1. So in this case, our change is a +3. For a change in x, again, now I'm asking myself, how much am I changing by for each of these x values? From -4 to -2, I need to add 2 because we know we're adding because the negative is getting smaller. -2 plus 2 also gives us 0. 0 plus 2 gives us 2. And 2 plus 2 gives us 4. So our change in x is 2. And I can't simplify that, so that is my final answer. Okay, next one. Don't forget to find the slope of a table. We find the change in y divided by the change in x. So from 10 to 6, this time it's dropping, which means we have to subtract. We subtract 4 from 10 to get 6. How do we get from 6 to 2? Same thing, we're subtracting 4. How do we get from 2 to -2? Same thing, subtracting 4. And then -2 to -6, again, subtracting 4. So our change in y is a -4. For our change in x, from -2 to -1, the negative is getting smaller, which means we're adding 1. From -1 to 0, we added 1 again. From 0 to 1, we added 1. And from 1 to 2, we added 1. So our change in x is 1. Does 1 go into -4? Yes, it does. We can simplify. We will get that our slope is -4. If you're not sure, use a calculator. Okay. Now we are moving on to the one that we learned the most recently, which is finding the slope of a line that contains 2 points. So for these problems, we are going to use the slope formula, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So starting with the first one, I'm going to label each of my points x1, y1, x2, y2. This one is x1. This is y1. You know what? Let me do it in the bottom. Okay. This is x1. This is y1. This is x2. And this is y2. So once I do that, I'm just plugging it into this formula here. We get that our slope is equal to y2 minus y1 goes on top. So that's going to be 8 minus 3. Okay. In the bottom, it's going to be x2 minus x1. x2 is 4 minus x1, which is 1. Whoops, wrong color. So 8 minus 3 is 5. 4 minus 1 is 3. I cannot simplify 5 over 3, so that is my final answer. For the next one, question 6, we have the points -3, 4, and 3, -5. So again, start off by labeling your points. This is going to be x1, y1, and this is going to be x2, y2. Once you've labeled them, you're going to go ahead and plug it into your slope formula. Slope equals y2, in this case y2 is -5, minus y1, in this case y1 is 4, over, in the bottoms we are subtracting the x's. So x2, which is 3, minus x1, which is -3. So be careful anytime you have a negative for your second numbers. Remember, our slope formula tells us we're subtracting, and we also need to carry that negative from that number. So in this case, we get 2 negatives. We did talk about how to solve this when we went over it, but if you don't know, use a calculator. Anytime I have a negative and a negative right next to each other, they become a positive. So this new problem is now 3 plus 3. So in the bottom, 3 plus 3 is 6. And then -5 minus 4 is -9. Now, 6 does not go into 9 evenly, but I do know that there is a number that divides both of these. And so the number that divides both of these is 3. 3 divides 9, and 3 also divides 6. So where'd it go? -9 divided by 3 is, why does it keep doing that? -9 divided by 3 is -3, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. So our slope here is -3 over 2. Okay. Explain whether the graph has a positive, negative, 0, or undefined slope. So starting with number 1, this question is pretty much just asking us, what would slope dude say? If I have a line that when I look at from left to right, so I'm looking at this graph from left to right, is that line going up, down, is it flat, or is it like straight down, vertical? So in this case, this line is going down. What does slope dude say when he's on a slope that's going down? He says nice negative. So that tells me that this line has a negative slope. And you can tell me because slope dude says nice negative, or you can tell me because it is going down. Okay, for the next one, we have a line that is vertical, straight up and down. So in this case, if you remember from Slope Dude, if you don't, look up the video and he'll help you remember. But he is falling and he says the worst curse word in math ever, which is undefined. And so the slope is undefined because we have a vertical line. So make sure you know how to tell whether a line is positive, negative, undefined, or 0 slope. Moving on to question 9. Question 9 says, this table shows the cost to rent a car as a linear function of time, days. Find the rate of change of the cost in dollars per day. So this, I know we didn't see too many examples like this in class, but it's exactly what we've been doing with tables. This is a table, except this specific table is showing me how much it's going to cost me to rent a car depending on how many days I rent it for. So for example, if I rent a car for 1 day, it'll cost me $70. If I rent it for 2 days, it'll cost me $90. If I rent it for 3, it'll cost me $110. If I rent it for 5, it'll cost me $150. So in order to find the rate of change, it's the same thing as slope. Remember, it's going to be the change in y divided by the change in x. So for the change in y first, from 70 to 90, how do I get from 70 to 90? We add 20. How do we get from 90 to 110? We add 20. How do I get from 110 to 150? We add 40. Now, because they are different, I can't just write down my rate of change right away because I need to make sure that it's constant. So I'll do that in a moment. Let's find our change in x first. From 1 to 2, we're adding 1. From 2 to 3, we're adding 1. And from 3 to 5, we're adding 2. So let's go ahead and set up our rate of change. There's no highlighter on Cami. Okay, so our first one is going to be 20 over 1. Because when I look at these numbers here, I get 20 over 1. Okay. The next one is also 20 over 1. So I'm not going to write that one down, but if it were different, I would write it down. And then the last one is 40 over 2. So change in y is 40. Change in x is 2. Now, I need to make sure that these are the same. And so 20 over 1, is that the same thing as 4 over 2? Well, does 2 go into 40? Yes, it does. So I could simplify this and get 20, or I can also simplify it and get 20 over 1. So in this case, they are the same. So my rate of change is 20 over 1. But what does that mean? And so the question told me find the rate of change of the cost in dollars per day. In this case, right, our 20 is the change in y, which means that the total cost is represented by y. The change in x represented the change in the number of days. So that means that the number of days is what is represented here. So 20 means cost, money, and the 1 means number of days. So my answer to this problem would be the change is, or the rate of change is, $20 per day. That means that if I wanted it for an extra day, how much is the cost changing by? It's changing by $20 each day. Okay. Moving on to number 10. Number 10 is very similar, but now we're looking at the volume of a balloon. This table shows the volume of a balloon in cubic centimeters as helium is released per second. Find the rate of change of the volume with respect to time. Okay. So we're doing the same thing. Finding the rate of change. In order to find the rate of change, that's going to be the change in y divided by the change in x. So for my change in y from 500 to 440, be careful here. Notice how the numbers are dropping, so we know it's going to be a negative. How do I get from 500 to 40? If you're not sure, type it into your calculator. Okay, but the change is going to be 60. Just do 500 minus 440 gives you 60. We know it's negative because the number is going down. From 440 to 380, again, minus 60. From 380 to 320, minus 60. And then from 320 to 260, again, minus 60. So since these are all the same, I can go ahead and write it down. My change in y is negative 60 cubic centimeters divided by the change in x. So for x, remember x represents time, seconds. So from 0 to 2, we're adding 2 seconds. From 2 to 4, we're adding 2 seconds. 4 to 6, we're adding 2 seconds. And 6 to 8, adding 2 seconds. So we always get the same. It's 2 seconds. So our rate of change, our change in x is 2. And so remember in the beginning, we said, in the previous problem, we said this first one is going to be our x. So in this case, x represents the number of seconds. And then this is, why am I writing y? Whoops, sorry guys. This is x, this is y. So in this case, the negative 60 represents the volume of the balloon. The 2 represents the seconds. So in this case, this means that the volume is dropping 60 cubic centimeters every 2 seconds. But notice how we have two even numbers here. That tells me that I could simplify. Let me just write that here. Negative 60 over 2. I can simplify to make this number a little bit better. You can say that 2 divides 60. Yeah, we can do it that way. 2 divides 60, how many times? Well, when we divide them, we get negative 30. And so what this tells me, don't forget negative 30, that's the same thing as negative 30 over 1. So this tells me that the rate of change is negative 30 cubic centimeters. And I'm just going to write that. I'm not going to write the whole cubic centimeters part. Whoops. I'm going to abbreviate it. So the rate of change is negative 30 centimeters cubed per second. Because remember, that's what this table represents. Okay. If you would have said, oh, it's negative 60 centimeters cubed, you would have to tell me that it's for every 2 seconds. Okay. So if you didn't simplify, you would have to tell me, oh, it's dropping 60 centimeters cubed every 2 seconds. But for 1 second, it's dropping 30 centimeters cubed. All right, moving on to some error analysis problems. So for this one, it says Jacob found the slope from 2 given points on a graph. His work is shown below. Identify the mistake he made and find the correct answer. Make sure that you show your work. Okay, so the way I recommend doing this is to do it on your own and ignore what Jacob did. Okay, so I know that in order to find the slope, I need to use rise. Let me actually use the colors I usually use because that'll help me separate my work from Jacob's. To find the slope, I'm going to use rise over run. And so Jacob started with this point. Remember, technically you could get the correct answer. It doesn't matter what point you start with. I'm going to start with this point here, right here in red. And so I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4. Since I went down, that's a minus 4. But don't forget, Jacob started somewhere different than us. Don't assume that that's where he went wrong. Keep going. So minus 4. From there, I'm going to go to the right 2, 1, 2, and I end up here. So my run is a positive 2. And so can I simplify negative 4 over 2? Yes, I can. My slope is negative 2. So actually, we didn't even have to do all that because Jacob said that his slope was positive 2. But if we remember what slope dude tells us by looking at that line, I didn't even have to do all this work. I should have been able to say, well, the line's going down, which means that his slope shouldn't be negative. I'm sorry, it shouldn't be positive. It should be negative. So our final answer is Jacob got a positive slope. Whoop. What happened? Okay. Jacob got a positive slope, but the line is going down. Meaning it should be negative. Okay, and so our correct slope is this one here. Slope equals negative 2. All right, last question. Bella needed to find the slope between 2 points on her quiz. She used the formula and showed her work below. Find the mistake she made and give the correct slope. Okay, so don't forget the formula to find our slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So let's see what she did wrong. Bella started off by labeling each of her points x1, y1, x2, y2. So far we agree she's good. From there, she plugged in her points. And so in the formula, we see that she plugged in 5 minus 3. Y2 is 5 minus y1 is negative 3. There's her mistake. So the formula should say y2 we said was 5. So she's still correct there. Minus, this minus comes from our formula, y1, which is negative 3. So this is her mistake. She forgot a negative or a minus. Okay, so let's continue because we still have to find the correct slope. In the bottom, she did x2, which is negative 7. I used the wrong color. Negative 7 minus x1, which is 1. So she didn't mess up in the bottom, but she did mess up in the top. So 5 minus negative 3, these become a positive, which makes it 5 plus 3, which is 8, over negative 7 minus 1, which is the same thing as negative 7 plus negative 1, which is negative 8. And if I simplify this, we get that our slope is negative 1. Okay, so that is all. If you have any questions, send me an email, or we will try to go over any questions you may have tomorrow before the quiz. Happy studying.